How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I join you today with some surprise. I do, with a little bit of surprise. Atlanta Faze has officially confirmed their roster moving into the Modern Warfare 2 season, that being Abizi, Celium, Simp, and now Slasher. Arcades has transitioned now to the LA Guerrillas. Slasher, coming from LAG, now finds himself on the Atlanta Faze. And it's wild to me because I just truly didn't think this is going to happen so soon. Like, I came into the offseason being like, listen, I know Atlanta Faze had all the problems that they did, and maybe I was just wanting to see them go another title. Maybe I was not really thinking about the mental toll that it feels like this franchise, these players went under this past season. But to me, it's going to take a long time to fully adjust to the fact that these four players are not going to be on the same team moving into this next year. Because whenever I saw the dominance that they displayed in Cold War, and I tweeted this out, whenever I saw the dominance they displayed in Cold War, whenever they hoisted the trophy at the 2021 COD Champs, I was like, this very well could be a team that goes down as one of the longest lasting rosters in Call of Duty Esports history. And I wasn't trying to be a victim of the moment, but when you talk about what we said when that change was made, right? Arcades, we're going from 5v5 to 4v4. We, lose Priesta. We lose Major Maniac. It's Abizi, Celium, and Simp. They're looking for one more player, their fourth and final player. Arcades, that could be a great move. In fact, that very well may be the perfect move. And it was. It was the perfect move for Atlanta Faze. Seldom have I ever said that may be the perfect decision that a team could make as a fourth. And that's what we were all saying. That's what we were all saying when Arcades was added onto this roster, was that this may be a perfect roster change. You got exactly what you wanted. You got the IGL. You got somebody who's going to mix with these players. You have another grinder type of a player who's willing to sacrifice stats for these other three guys. And then we saw it on full display. We saw the payoff of what we thought could be Atlanta Faze now moving forward, and they reached those expectations. They got the revenge after the loss that they suffered at COD Champs in the MW season. They go on to have a unbelievably dominant Cold War year, without question one of the most dominant seasons we have seen from a lineup in Call of Duty Esports history. And now we sit with the next title now coming to a close, and the rosters away from each other. So for me, it's weird, and it's like I said, it's going to take some time. But when you really do think about the details of Atlanta Faze, what they went through from this season, it's maybe not as surprising as I think. Because when you do look at Atlanta, what they were able to do in Cold War, it's interesting because when we've talked about top rosters throughout Call of Duty Esports history, the issue that sometimes happens is that whenever you have a dominant year, you then look at next year you basically hold next year at a very high threshold. In fact, it could be a threshold that's just not possible to reach. That may be what the primary culprit is for a lot of rosters throughout Call of Duty Esports history that just didn't make it another season after winning a world championship, because the threshold's at its highest. I mean, what did you want to do? What would Atlanta Faze have looked at this season as a successful season, a more successful season from last year? If what, they just made it to if they won everything? Like, how? That's not sustainable, especially with the current way that we see the game. And so I think Atlanta Faze had high expectations moving into Vanguard after winning the World Championship. We thought Vanguard was going to be Cold War 2.0, and it wasn't. It wasn't even close, right? The fact that Atlanta came into this year with the highest of expectations, like I said, a threshold that very well may have not even been achievable. And for them to not even have gone even on the mountain. Like, if we're talking about the thresholds way up here at the top of the mountain, can they actually get there? They didn't even make the journey, right? From a statistical standpoint, the fact that they were not able to win a single title in Vanguard has got to hurt these players in a lot of ways. Like, mentality wise, we talk about bickering, when we talk about chemistry, all of that takes a major toll. And the fact that not only were they not winning, but the fact that they were so close to winning also stings, right? Losing Major 1, losing Major 2, losing Major 3 and COD champs in the grand finals has got to hurt. And I know that Atlanta Faze, this title was not their favorite. And I thought personally that that would probably help them brush off a lot of the annoyance, a lot of the expectations of not winning, was that, hey, you know what? We're not a fan of this game. We're prone to the slow starts. We just seem to have this one issue. The problem being is that winning solves everything. Atlanta Faze never had the opportunity to let that weight finally come off of them because they kept losing, right? They lost to Optic Texas at Major 1 in front of their home crowd, of which they were victim to the overrated chants. They lost to their rivals. Okay, you know what? It's the first event of the year. No big deal. We'll turn things around at Major 2. They go into Major 2 and then they lose to the Gorillas, Slasher's team, funny enough. They lose to LAG, one of the craziest Cinderella stories that we have seen in Call of Duty Esports history. They fall to the Gorillas in Major 2. And now it's like, okay, well, you know what? We lost Major 1. We lost Major 2. Let's just focus up. Let's make sure we win Major 3. And then they go into Major 3. They lose the winners finals versus the Seattle Surge, in which was one of the craziest series I have seen in my entire life of watching this esport, right? A decade of watching this game. That goes down as one of the craziest series of all time in my eyes. The fact that they were up, what was it, like 5? It was like a 16v5 in the game 3 control. They somehow lose. They go into the very next map, up by like 90 to 100 points, ready to close out the game, and they lose. Seattle makes a comeback. Later lose the game 5. They get reverse swept, in which 2 out of those 3 games were unbelievable jokes. And then they go into the grand finals to face off against that same roster, and we're thinking, okay, this is going to be it. Revenge is sweet. They should have beat them originally. And then they fall to Seattle Surge again. They lose another major. They've now lost 3 straight majors, all in the grand finals, of which they were the favorites coming in. And then we find ourselves at champs. This is the time. Okay, Atlanta Faze. You know what? They've lost 3. They technically haven't won a tournament this season. 3 out of these 4 majors they've lost in the grand finals. This is where the payoff is coming. This is the time. They drop to the LA Thieves. Okay, COD Champs Grand Finals, here we come. They've been on this stage before. I know it's the LA Thieves, but like we said, here is the payoff. And they lose it again, right? Like we said, winning solves everything. And when Atlanta started to lose, and in such a painful way, in all these grand finals, the weight of those expectations, there was nothing to lean on at that point, right? There was not a strategy. There wasn't a out of game problem. There wasn't a title that you could point at and say, that's the reason why we're struggling. No, because it was all about the finals. They were getting there. They just weren't able to capitalize. And so all of that, at least in my opinion, started to boil over and even affect the relationships between the players on the team, specifically the Faze versus Arcitys partnership. And so I feel like throughout all of these losses, you also had something very interesting going on throughout this title, because we all know, right? This was a career year out of Celliant, but it really wasn't for Simp and Abizi. And so I feel like what was going down throughout the year, what really was affecting, it wasn't just the losses, but it was also the fact of, okay, we're losing. How do we figure this out? Like, what really is the problem that we're dealing with? And so you'd see the tweets come out from Arcitys on occasion. Why am I the one carrying the bomb in Search and Destroy? Our S&D, we don't know what's going on. Simp finally is letting me run the sniper in Search and Destroy. Thank goodness. You'd see, Simp tweet out frustration about this year. You'd see Abizi say, gosh, I cannot wait for next year to come around. You'd see the tweets come forward. And so what I think happened throughout the year, and I could be wrong on this, this is just what I personally think what went down as the year progressed, was that because you were trying to see Abizi and Simp really get in their groove, it kind of became more of, Arcitys, listen, we need you to do this because I'm trying to figure out why I'm not having the same year that I had throughout these past few years, right? I'm struggling a little bit. Maybe I need to have the sniper on this moment, or maybe you need to carry the bomb, or maybe you need to be the flex, maybe you need to be the main AR. We need you to do this because we're trying to make sure that we can be who we need to be. And I feel like Arcedes, who knows the talent that he has been so self-sacrificing ever since joining the Atlanta Faze. It started to boil over, like I said, in that capacity. And so I feel like the team kept losing. They couldn't really seem to solve the problems. And from an individual standpoint, you saw the guys feeling uncomfortable because they weren't themselves, right? Vanguard was not the title for them. Even though if you were to tell me we're going to have a map like Bocage, you're going to tell me that we're going to have a very fast reaction, low TTK type of game, I would think, okay, well, Abizi and Simp are going to be the best players in the game. There's no doubt about that. So it really is wild, the fact that it wasn't their game, even though it looked like from on paper standpoint that this should surely be their best title. Like I said, winning solves everything. But at the same time, for Atlanta Faze, what has happened to every top roster or every dynasty that has existed throughout Call of Duty history? Why have they split apart? Is it because they just weren't good anymore? Like was Cole/EG when they decided to split apart? Was it because they were getting last place in tournaments? Did Optic Gaming decide to split because they were just horrible at the game? Did all 4 players just instantly just lose all of their talent? Did Atlanta Faze, who finished second at 4 tournaments this year, did they fall off? Clearly not. It's because of the internal problems within the roster. And so I feel like the losses of constantly being in second place mixed in with the frustration of these players started to boil over. And that is the reason why we see the changes that are being made, which now leads us to our next point. Slasher, right? How about this? I feel like we need to transition from Atlanta Faze now into what is a very positive situation for somebody like Slasher, because when you look at his last 3 seasons, he has got to have one of the biggest smiles on his face, right? He's going to have he's got to be smiling ear to ear right now, knowing that he is going to the Atlanta Faze to be alongside of Abizi, Celia, and Simp. Has got to be a great feeling, because when you look at his last 3 years, there were moments, and he's talked about it. This isn't just me saying it. This is what he has said. Throughout these last 3 seasons of the CDL, it's been difficult, right? The first year, OGLA, loads of expectations on that roster. Never were able to see the heights that they wanted. Never reached the expectations, the potential that we set for that roster, which was to be one of the best teams in the game. Never even close reached that level. In fact, we saw tons of roster changes. We saw substitutes of players to close out the year. A lack of practice, a lack of dedication. It was talked about. There was all kinds of drama with OGLA throughout the year. Moves into next year, it's a reunion with the Thieves. Finally, everything will be restored back to normal. I can be on the LA Thieves. And what happens? LA Thieves makes more roster changes than any other team that we have seen, maybe in CDL history, if not just throughout Cold War. At one point, was not even in the league, on the bench, wondering if he will ever be able to play as a starter again. Debated on if he should maybe retire. He talked about that. He said it was the worst season that I've ever had in my life from a mentality standpoint. I literally thought about retiring. Goes into the next year because LAT would later add him back for champs. Goes to the other LA franchise, the Gorillas. Expectations, somewhat high. Wasn't like it was the best team on paper, but you know what? They had some great pieces. Felt like the team could be in a good spot. They were investing a lot into this really being Slasher's team. They go on to win Major 2. And that's it, right? They win Major 2 and they fall off of a cliff. So these last 3 years for Slasher, while you do have one title to speak of, it's not been what he's used to. Because when you do look at what he was doing before the CDL took place, right? He goes out on top. Back-to-back championships, COD champs, grand finals, under 100 Thieves, playing with players like Octane, Priesta, Kenny, the list goes on. You're playing with talent like that, and then you come into the CDL, and you feel like the one top player that is watching everybody go by. You're seeing every top player that you have been compared to seeing success in the CDL, except for yourself. So this is a wonderful, wonderful moment for somebody like Slasher. I mean, truly, I feel great for him. And this is also very much a full circle type of moment for somebody like Slasher, because this franchise, right, Faze Clan, now obviously Atlanta Faze in the CDL, this was the first franchise, first official major organization that he actually ever played for, right? If you look back, I think it was Advanced Warfare, right? He ends up joining Faze Clan coming into that year. Joined to start off Advanced Warfare, had been on teams like Noble Vanquish before that, which is where he really got his spotlight. Before that, played on, I think it was Vex, which is where I actually started to hear about his name a lot, being, one of the more top, it wasn't really considered amateur players, but somebody who wasn't a part of a major pro team. You started to hear about this guy Slasher quite a bit. And then he would later go on to the very first event, now under Faze, wins the franchise or the organization their second ever Call of Duty major title. At the same time, also gives Faze their first ever MLG title, which was huge, as I said, at MLG Columbus 2014. So it is a very full circle type of moment for somebody like Slasher. And I would say the positive moving into this is not just because he's back with Atlanta Faze. It's not just because he's back with the Faze organization, but it's also because he is off of a great season. Like, when you do look at his numbers this year, and I know it's not all about KDs, I get that, right? But when you do look at his numbers, they are solid, right? Hardpoint a 1.05, Control a 1.01, S&D a 1.20 KD, number 2 throughout the entirety of the year, just behind one player. We all know it's Celium. Like, we don't have to act as if we don't know who the number 1 KD and basically everything is. And then in Major 4, held a 1.17 KD, which was number 3 out of everybody in the CDL. So a very successful season individually for somebody like Slasher. He definitely had his moments where it wasn't great, but I think a lot of it did obviously have to do with the talent that the roster had. But no doubt about it, had a phenomenal end to the year. That was really the only positive that LAG had, was the fact that Slasher was playing as well as he was. He was grinding in S&D tournaments. He was really improving in that department. And then to close out the year, after the Major 2 loss, he was the only piece that was playing well for the team. After they were trying to figure out, how did we just win Major 2 and now we're not winning anything? He was the only guy, who was obviously able to at least have a little bit of light shed onto the Guerrillas franchise. And I will say, kind of on topic with that, while it was a great season individually for Slasher, I know I talked about it. It's not really been a great last 3 years. It was also a very frustrating end to the Vanguard year. Not just because he was playing individually great, but the team wasn't seeing success, but also because if you listen to the content, the documentary pieces that LAG was putting out throughout the season, their documentary was called Warpath. One thing that I kept taking away from a lot of the episodes was just the frustration that Slasher was having. He was talking about how this team was having mistakes. They were having problems. He felt like he knew how to identify the problems, but they just weren't able to solve them as a roster. Does that sound familiar? Right? Does that sound familiar by chance? A team just not able to figure out the problems, figure out the mistakes that they're making in-game, can't seem to translate them. That's because we're talking as well essentially about the Atlanta Faze, right? This is why I feel like, just already talking now about Slasher being integrated with the Faze roster, this is what I feel like could be a huge benefit for Atlanta, because they absolutely have had mistakes throughout this year. And like I said, it's not surprising. Like, it's not as if me telling you that is shocking you, because we all knew, right? We all knew Atlanta Faze was having problems, having mistakes in game, knew what they were doing whenever they'd get out of the lobby, when they take off the headsets, they knew what they did wrong, but they were having problems translating that to end game. In RCDs, which I thought this was one of the more weighty quotes that I would say in terms of just like what hits you and you're like, wow. In the last documentary that Atlanta Faze just put out when they announced Slasher is joining onto this team, this is a quote from RCDs. He said, "It was on me to find out why we were underperforming." And this is just me, roughly saying what he said, but you get the point. "It was on me to find out why we were underperforming on Sundays. I'm the guy that should be figuring that out. And I was never able to. I wasn't able to find out why on Sundays we were underperforming the way that we were, why when we would get into those COD, finals, when we get into those major finals, even the COD Champs Grand Final, it was on me to figure it out, and I never did, and I couldn't figure it out." And so what I think is interesting is that, at least from an outside point of view, Slasher feels like somebody who obsesses over figuring out the mistakes that rosters have. And that to me is what could make Atlanta Faze a much stronger roster moving forward and moving into next year, because they need someone in game to deliver what they know how to do out of game. And that was to me the only critique, and Arstees just said it, so he would agree with this. The only critique that you could give to Arstees was the fact that he was never fully able in the big moments to translate the mistakes to the team, or to identify in game, in the moment, what the problems were. And the positive, so we're talking about a negative, now we're talking about a positive. The positive is that Slasher is somebody who will do that. At least will give it his best shot, because like I said, he obsesses over those kind of things. Now, the interesting question when we talk about, this new edition, did Atlanta Faze get better, right? What an interesting question to ask. Did Atlanta Faze get better by losing Arstees, essentially dropping Arstees, allowing him to go elsewhere, and picking up Slasher? And I'd love for you guys to honestly put your thoughts on this down in the comments, because to me, it is a very hard question, not to ask, but to answer, because it's almost too broad of a question. Because in some ways I would say yes, and in some ways I would say no. Because do I feel like Slasher will get along personally? Do I feel like he will have the same chemistry that Arstees had with this trio? No, I don't. I actually think long-term, that may be the problem the thing that I am most worried about Atlanta Faze moving forward, is the fact that I'm not sure if these personalities can mix when the grind gets tough, right? If we had an issue, again, moving into next year, let's say that Atlanta Faze starts off winning, great. Then they lose, let's say it's major, same format as next year. Let's say they lose Major 2 and Major 3. What happens? I feel like that is where long-term we could see the issues happen with Slasher and the rest of the team. So I don't think long-term, personally, chemistry-wise, and really when we just talk about players as individuals coming together, I don't think that improves. And I feel like that is a primary culprit, as we talked about earlier, with all the dynasty teams, all the top rosters throughout Call of Duty history. Why they struggle at times is because they bicker, they banter, they go back and forth. So I don't feel like they got better in that department. But I did feel like Atlanta Faze did do some major problem solving. I very much do. I think that they did a lot of problem solving by adding in somebody like Slasher. So do I think to not answer this question, but to try my best to answer it the best way that I can? Do I think Atlanta Faze wins a title next year? Yes, I do. I absolutely do. I feel very confident in saying that I think that Slasher, alongside of Abizi, Stellium, and Sim, will win a championship next year. Do I think it is the perfect fit for Atlanta? No, I don't think it's the perfect fit for Atlanta. I think the perfect fit would be if you could somehow combine Slasher and Arstees into one person, which is, as we know, not possible. So that, I believe, would be the perfect fit for this Atlanta Faze team. Now, at this point where they sit, I think when they were right after Modern Warfare, Arstees sliding into this team as the fourth, at that time for Atlanta, that was the perfect move. But this is a different team. This is a different trio now in this, moment of time than it was then. But I do feel like when we talk about, is this a perfect fit for Atlanta? I don't know if it's a perfect fit for Faze. I don't know if it's a perfect fit for these three players. But I do feel like this is a very, very close, if not perfect fit for Slasher, right? He may wear a size 12, but you know what? Atlanta Faze may be a size 11. It doesn't matter, right? I like these shoes a lot. These are great. I really like what I'm wearing right now. I really like my fit that I have right now with the Atlanta Faze, right? He gets to play with three of the most talented players Call of Duty has ever seen. He gets to work with not just a contending team, but a top contending team, right? A player who is coming off of a career year in Stellium. I know he was critiqued a lot for statistics. I'm more one to say that I think it wasn't stat padding by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's just the way the game worked, to be honest. It's a conversation for another day. Regardless, Mr. 1.2, 1.3 every single series, it felt like, every single game mode. So a player coming off of a career year, you also get to play alongside of the greatest SMG duo of all time, right? Two players who are in your top players in Call of Duty Esports history. Same thing with Stellium. You also get the task if you're Slasher, of problem solving and mistake solving, what is the Atlanta Faze, right? As somebody who is what I imagine Slasher is, he gets to play with Atlanta Faze and identify what the mistakes are. He gets to come into the most gifted, one of the most gifted rosters we have seen in Call of Duty Esports history. And as somebody who loves to problem solve when it comes to rosters, he gets to figure out what's going on with the team. It's like a puzzle, right? I mean, I know he's like, I think he's like an engineer. It's like, this is like, I feel like you're so excited to have the opportunity, not just to play with these guys, but to unlock what could still be something very new with the Atlanta Faze team. Imagine for a moment if Atlanta Faze knew all the things that they knew out of game. Imagine if they were able to get all those things in game. Imagine if they were able to, that's the one kryptonite that they've had. Imagine if they figure that out. What would happen then? I mean, they're in 4 finals this year. Do they win all of those if they are able to figure out those one, little things? I think they win a few, if not a majority of them, if they're able to solve those problems. So, as I said, Slasher gets to play with one of the most talented lineups he has ever been on. He gets to play with Celium, Abizi, and Sim, 3 of the most talented players Call of Duty Esports has ever seen. Celium off of a career year, Abizi and Sim, the greatest SMG duo of all time, and in my eyes, the greatest individual players who have come together and formed a duo. To me, one of the, if not the greatest duo of all time already. Plus, he gets to go from the LA Gorillas, at one point, the worst team in the CDL. After they won Major 2, LAG would go on to lose 10 out of their last 11 games. Slasher was not at champs last year. Now he gets to be on Atlanta, right? And so you're loving this. If you are a Slasher fan, you love this right now. It is the perfect fit. If it's not a perfect fit, as I said, you're putting that shoe on anyway, and it looks great on you. At the same time, while FaZe did want Dashing, I believe they also did want Shotzi based off the rumors. I think there was absolutely a case to be made that they probably wanted maybe Pred or Sib based off the season that they had. But I believe that regardless of, the players who weren't available, because as we said, those players are restricted free agents. Shotzi technically wasn't, but Dashi, Pred, and Sib were. Regardless, despite them maybe not getting what would be their first choice, I think that they definitely did still handpick Slasher. I don't think it was a matter of like, okay, we're running out of options. We do have some free agents available. I guess we'll go with Slasher. No, I don't think it's like that, right? If you, out of the free agents who were actually available, and obviously Optic Texas sounded like they were for a moment, but if we're talking about the guys who were actually available, so we're talking about the Camis of the world, the Attachers of the world, do you really think, this is just my personal opinion, do you really think those guys would have said no? Do you think they would have denied the opportunity to play for Atlanta Faze if they asked? I don't think you do at all. I don't think you do. I think that you take an opportunity to play with Atlanta Faze every day of the week. So that is why I feel like this was a hand-picked move. It wasn't just because, it makes sense financially. Let's send Arsties to LAG and in exchange, well, I guess it works out. Slasher would be available, so let's go and grab Slasher. I don't think it was like that. I think it was, okay, let's look at the board. Let's see all of the options that we have available, true options that we have available, and let's pick who we think is the best. And so they started to do that, but I believe Slasher was very high on their list. I do. I believe that they have wanted to have, I believe that they looked at him as one of their primary options, and he happened to be available given the fact that Arsties was now going to be on LAG, and his spot then would be open. And the last thing that I will say is that, when you do look at history, for example, there was a moment, I forget who tweeted this out, and I greatly apologize, but there was somebody who tweeted out, I think it might have actually been Scrim Intel, CDL Scrim Intel, who tweeted this out. And if I'm wrong, well, hey, he gets the props anyway. I'm pretty sure that coming into MW, so moving into the first year of franchising, it actually was rumored that Abizi, Simp, and Slasher were actually supposed to be a part of the same team together. So there's been a lot of clips coming out of the woodwork of teams, or I think it was the CDL who tweeted out, when the rumors of Dashi going to Atlanta Faze were at their hottest. It was like a clip of Simp saying, I've played with a lot of players, throughout my career that I've loved to be with. If I had to pick one guy, I guess it would be Dashi, and then those started to come up. And so I feel like this is very much the same thing where we were headed into MW, and I think it was, I forget what players were linked to where at the time, but there was a very interesting rumor that was going around that said a BZ, Simp, and Slasher could be a team of 3 moving into MW together. So that is something to think about. So I would love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on this roster. I know we could talk about the nitty gritty. I was going to jump into the Breaking Point roster builder, but we've talked for long enough. I will say that I think this team's going to be nasty in Search Destroy. They're going to get back to their roots there, where you have 2 players who were number 1 and number 2 in S&D KD from this past year. I think BZ and Simp are going to be back to their normal selves going into Modern Warfare 2. So I thought this is going to be a powerhouse roster. I labeled them very, very high. And I think in S&D they're going to be great. And I think the mistake solving, the problem solving that they have had issues with previously, now have their best chance to be solved now with somebody like Slasher in the lineup. Do I think personal problems or chemistry wise, out of game stuff, do I think that could be a problem? I do, but I think it is definitely more of a positive than a negative. I think there's a lot of mutual respect between the 2 parties. Slasher knows what a great opportunity this is for him. Faze knows that by, they obviously chose him for a reason. They clearly know and have a lot of respect for the player that he is as well, and for what he has been able to do. But very, very excited about this Atlanta Faze team moving forward. I think that they will more than ever embrace the role of villain. Slasher is already known as that. I think at BZ, Stellium, and Simp, there has been no cheers for Atlanta. I can tell you right now, but I went to every major last year. There was no cheers for Atlanta Faze throughout the season, and now with Slasher being in the team, I think they go full villain, and I'm very excited to see that go down. Thanos has joined the Atlanta Faze, and I could not be more excited about it. But what would make me very excited is if you guys let me know down in the comments what you think about this roster. Was it a good move? Was it a bad move? Right? I'm really, the title of this video was discussing the Atlanta Faze. Did they get better after adding Slasher? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I promise more off-season content is coming to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys back on the channel very soon.